Welcome back to another edition of Crafting and Crime Daily. I am your host, Rebecca, aka Crafting Journey. That's because I sit and I craft while I tell you recaps of the live trials. Right now I'm covering the Alex Murdaugh trial. Like, who isn't covering the Alex Murdaugh trial? Day 21 was yesterday. Day 22 today. I'm going to tell you all about what happened on day 21 while I work on my diamond painting. Last night, though, I got out. I went through my cross stitch and I got out a few that I want to work on, other than the White Santa that I started the other day, and I got this one out. It says, Hocus Pocus, I need coffee to focus. So I didn't finish the hocus part or the little spider. There's a couple little spiders and some spider web, which I'm not sure I'm going to do the spider web. It's all black back stitching, and I mean, we'll see. I'm terrible. I'm just not a good cross stitcher. I enjoy it, but I'm not really particularly good at it. And last night I'm sitting here and I'm cross stitching and listening to the trial and totally messed up a whole letter. I have the H, O, and then I was on the C, and I had to frog the whole thing out. So after that, I just went to bed and played Minecraft. Okay, let's talk about day 21. It starts out with the judge coming in and asking Jim Griffin about Twitter. I don't do Twitter, so apparently neither does the judge, but I get Twitter notifications all the time. I don't even know how to tweet, yeah, anyway. So apparently over the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, the judge says I kept getting, people were forwarding me a tweet that you did, Mr. Griffin, the defense attorney, Jim Griffin. And Jim stands up and he says, "Oh, Your Honor, all I did was I retweeted a newspaper article." And he says, "Is this part of your new defense strategy?" I thought that was funny. And he says, "No, Your Honor, I just retweeted an article." I don't know what the article was about. I never saw I don't follow these guys. I follow silly stuff like Big Brother and, goofy stuff like that. So anyway, the judge tells him this story of an NBA player that got in big trouble for retweeting something and lost millions of dollars because of it. But he just cautioned him not to do that again. And he says, "Not that I'm one of your tweet followers, because I'm not, but people were forwarding it to him." So he advised him not to do that in the future. These lawyers for Alex Murdaugh, they have been so injected into the facts of this case. I'm surprised that they can still represent the guy. They're on social media. They're at the house, right after the murders. They're always talking to the witnesses, and the witnesses are calling them, "Hey, what's going on with Alec?" It's just weird. Just weird. So let's start out. The first witness is Richard Alexander Murdaugh III. I think he's the third, which is AKA Buster Murdaugh. Is my microphone on? Is this thing on? Okay, it's on. Buster Murdaugh. Red hair, flaming red hair, just like his dad. Just sort of almost the spitting image of his dad. So his testimony was so unemotional. I really didn't know what to expect from Buster, but I didn't expect basically no personality, no emotion, he just blah, blah. So he talks about, and all of it appeared very, very rehearsed. Clearly they had gone through whatever script questioning that they were gonna, is the cow distracting you? It's distracting me. Yes, I'm wearing my cow shirt. Okay, let's start over. All right, so he talks about how he's a 26-year-old. He lives in Hilton Head Island in South Carolina. He grew up in Hampton, and he went to Wofford College. Never talks about going to law school. That does never, ever come up, which I'm surprised, because that goes to the credibility of this witness. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, so he said his parents attended all of his sporting events. He was really, really into sports. His brother, not so much. His brother was into the hunting, fishing, outdoor type stuff, but he did participate in sports. And Dad would always coach, and Mom and Dad were always there. He said it was a rare occasion where they weren't at the games, and if they weren't, there was usually a really good reason. So then he says that his parents purchased the Moselle property in 2012 when he was a sophomore in high school. Then he goes on to describe Moselle as a 1,700-acre property. Not most of it, he said, but a large portion of it is not accessible. It's swampland, it's not there's no roads, it's just pretty, isolated property. But there is a good portion as well that it has roads, has dove fields, deer, I don't know, this places where they sit to catch deer. There's a name for them. I don't know. I'm not a hunter. But in any case, he describes the property. He says, but mainly when they bought Moselle, they still lived in Hampton. The home that they had in Hampton was their primary residence. Until there was a hurricane. The hurricane came and some pine trees went down on top of their house in Hampton. So they had to have a lot of repair work done. So that's when they shifted and they moved out to Moselle. But at this time, by now, Buster isn't really living at home. He's at college. He's at Wofford. He said, and then he talks about the guns. He said that Paul was not good with securing his weapons. He would leave guns all over the property. He left him in his vehicle. He wouldn't lock the vehicle. And yes, he did lose a gun, one of the 300 blackouts. He said, yes, we got them for Christmas in 2016. Paul lost, he doesn't know whether it was lost, stolen. He doesn't know what happened to it. It's gone. So after that, he said Paul would use his 300 blackout. He had no knowledge that his father had replaced Paul's 300 blackout. He said he didn't know anything about that until he was sitting there listening to this trial. Then he learned that his dad had replaced Paul's 300 blackout. Because to his knowledge, Paul was always borrowing his 300 blackout. Then he talked about, there was a lot of questions about ammunition. So he did say that, so I learned a little bit about ammunition. So he said it's not unusual if you're like going out to shoot turkeys that you would put a larger gauge bullet behind a smaller gauge. He says because you want to shoot the turkey when it's up close, but if you miss and it happens to start running, follow-up bullet would be a larger gauge and it would help you get the turkey, I guess. I don't know. So, but he said it would be really unlikely. He doesn't know anybody under any circumstance that somebody would combine birdshot and buckshot on the same weapon. Now, as you'll recall, birdshot has about 9 pellets and buckshot has about 120, because it's for a large game. But he doesn't know anybody. Nobody in our family would ever do it, and he doesn't know anybody. He can't think of any reason why anybody would do it. So, and clearly that's how Paul was shot. There was a birdshot and then a buckshot. So he couldn't remember where he was living in the spring of 2021. The attorney had to prompt him. Well, weren't you living in the apartment in Columbia? And he's like, oh yeah, I was, that's where I was living. So he was spending by June, he is spending part of his time in his apartment in Columbia and another part of his time in Rock Hill with his girlfriend, Brooklyn, and her family, which is where he was the night of the murders. He has a rock solid alibi. He was with Brooklyn. In June of 2021, at the night of the murders, Paul was living going to University of South Carolina, so he had an apartment in Columbia, but when summer's out, you're not in school anymore. So Paul would go to work for his uncle, John Marvin. His uncle had a rental business, and he would work for his uncle. Now, they talked about the Brandstetters and, like all the relatives on mom's side, all the relatives on dad's side. We would spend holidays together. We'd go on trips together, both sides of the family. We'd go hunting, we'd go down to the Keys, we'd go different places. And he had a lot of cousins on mom's side, a lot of cousins on dad's side. And they were just one big happy family. Anyway, he said he was asked, how close is Alameda? Isn't Alameda pretty close to PMPED, the law firm? And he's like, well, not really. It's about 10 minutes away. He goes, but in Hampton, everything is close to everything because it's a small town. I'm like, okay, good answer. So he had kind of a sense of humor about that. And then he said, to go from Moselle to Alameda would be about 20 minutes. So he also talked about, and this is the first time I've heard anybody mention that they had any other property, the Murdochs, other than Moselle, the house in Hampton that they sold, and the beach house in, oh my God, my mind just went blank. The beach house, anyway. He talks about the river house. Remember, I don't know if I expressed this to you that, I think there's more going on behind these murders. There's, he wasn't just taking these drugs. He was instrumental and played a large part, I am positive, in drug runners coming in. They would park at this river. It was ocean access. Even Buster said it's in a very desolate area. And it has river access, ocean access, so you can just come in, offload your drugs, get in and out. Nobody would ever see you. It's a very desolate area. Now, that didn't come out on the stand. The only thing that came out on the stand was that they own this river house property, and it's very desolate. So, I'm just telling you, I think there's a drug component to this whole thing that we're never going to know about. But okay. So he talks about they would frequently visit Alameda. Him, his father, his brother, they would go most of the time at lunch or early in the evening. And if it was at night or in the evening and it was dark, they would park around the back and they would go in the back way. And they would always call to have the caretaker come and let them in. But they went in the back way because if they went in the front and they knocked on the door, the caretaker wouldn't hear them because Grandma and Grandpa's bedroom was in the back, and Grandma was pretty much Alzheimer's. She lived in her room, and Grandpa was suffering from cancer. So they would park around the back. So they spent a lot of time Buster describing, getting down off the stand and describing where they would park when they would get to Alameda. So then he talked about the communication between him and his family. That he said, anytime we were in the car, we were calling each other. Buster would call Mom would call Buster, Mom would call Paul would call Buster, Paul would call Mom, just several times a day, this family would speak to each other. Very close family. He did say that they would, speak more than several times a day. So at this point, the attorney Jim Griffin walks him through the phone calls that are on the night of June 7th, and he gets to the 9:08 p.m. phone call, which we're surmising was right after the murders. We know that Alex gets in his vehicle at 9:07 and leaves to go out to Alameda and starts making phone calls, and the first one's to Buster. And so he was asked about the subject matter. Do you remember what this phone call was about? And he said, yeah, he was just telling me he was going to Alameda. This was not unusual if they were going out there to visit. He called her M. We know her as Miss Libby, Alex's mom. If he was going out to visit M, he would call somebody. Hey, I'm going out to visit M. Just, hey, how are you? What are you up to? That kind of a phone call. He said Dad's demeanor was perfectly normal. He didn't notice anything unusual about Dad's demeanor on the phone that night. He did acknowledge that that the cell phone reception, first of all, at Moselle property is spotty because of the metal roofs and things like that. But he said that, so oftentimes Dad, if he was going somewhere else on the property, wouldn't always take his phone with him. Said his dad would frequently lose his phone, and he would frequently shower. Now, he was asked, what was your dad wearing that night when you got there? And he said he was wearing a t-shirt and shorts. But he said, anytime my dad went out on the property, and we know from past testimony that Alex supposedly was out on the property riding around with Paul that day, according to Buster, if he was out on the property and he got hot and sweaty, he would go in and take a shower. At that particular time, the person that we're seeing in the courtroom now, the Alex Murdaugh that we're seeing in the courtroom now, is a very slimmed down version, jailhouse food version of Alex Murdaugh. At the time of these murders, he 6'4", that hasn't changed, he's still 6'4", but at that point he was about 250, 260 pounds. So, he's out there and this is June in South Carolina, it's hot, it's humid, it's, you're getting sweaty. So the assumption, they're leaving the jury with the inference that Dad must have come in after being out with Paul and took a shower before dinner. So then he was asked about whether he had any knowledge of Dad's drug addiction. And he says yes. In 2018, his dad went to a drug rehab, a detox. Sorry, garbage truck. He went to a drug rehab. And then several times after that, there was several instances where either Maggie or Paul would find drugs, and then he would just do this sort of self-detox at home. And he really thought his dad had beat this thing. He had no idea that Dad was still doing drugs. And he said he never confronted his dad. He was never there when Dad was confronted with the drugs. So he doesn't know how his dad reacted. But he did say that there was no violence in this family, that if his dad, when they were younger, they'd get spankings, of course, but as they became adults, they always worked it out by talking. His dad had a tremendous amount of patience. So then they talked about the boating accident, and he talked about how it consumed his mother. She would read everything in the media. She was just consumed with it, and basically shunned in Hampton. She wouldn't go into Hampton anymore. She didn't want to go in the grocery stores, so she started doing everything over in Walterboro. That's where she'd go shopping and do all her, errands instead of Hampton, because she felt like people were staring at her and talking behind her back, and he said it was a really bad vibe in Hampton. He also testified that his dad did not appear overly anxious about the civil lawsuit. Mom, of course, and because he said it was a $40 million lawsuit. Now, he's like, weren't you a defendant in this lawsuit? He goes, yeah, I was, but I don't have $40 million, so I wasn't really worried about it. But he said his father was not overly concerned with the civil lawsuit, but was very concerned about the criminal charges that were pending against Paul Murdaugh for driving the boat that evening. He said, as a family, we never believed that Paul was driving that boat. I gotta tell you, Paul was driving the boat. Yeah. I don't care what this family believed. Paul was driving that boat. There's no question. The other survivors of that boat crash all are pretty much have the same story. Paul was driving the boat. Now we switch to the night of the murders. And he was asked about, where were you the night of the murders? And he said, he was with his girlfriend, Brooklyn, and he got a call. It was pretty late, 10:30, 11 o'clock-ish. and from his dad, and his dad said, "Are you sitting down?" And he's like, "Okay, yeah." And his dad tells him that his mother and brother have been murdered, and he said that Brooklyn could overheard this in the background. You know, she was in the background and she overheard what was saying, so she immediately started packing, and as soon as he got off the phone, they left and started heading towards Moselle from Rock Hill. I'm not from these parts. I don't know how far apart that is, but he said if they left 10:30, 11 o'clock, he says they probably got there about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he went to Moselle. He said when they arrived, at the house was his dad, Chris Wilson, several members of the law firm. Like, this was a packed house. His friends, Nolan Tootin, there was a lot of people in this house when he gets there at 2 o'clock in the morning. What? Yeah, so he said they stayed at Moselle for about 4 to 5 hours. Now he gets there at 2 in the morning. They stay for 4 or 5 hours. He said they left very early in the morning. So what's that? 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and then they all went over to Almeda. But before they went to Almeda, he was packing up Dad's clothes. He went into Dad's closet and he took out t-shirts and shorts. He couldn't remember having seen a t-shirt on the floor of the closet, but what he packed was t-shirts and shorts for his dad. Then they all went to Almeda, where they tried to get some sleep. Then they woke up early the next morning. Now, this I did not understand. If you get to Moselle at 2 in the morning, you spend 4 to 5 hours at Moselle, then you go to Almeda and try to get some sleep, and then you wake up early in the morning. I don't know what early in the morning is for this guy. They all go back to Moselle. They don't shower at Almeda. Everybody goes back to Moselle and showers, including Dad. What was your dad wearing? He says, I'm assuming he's wearing what I packed for him, shorts and a t-shirt. Now, we already know that the housekeeper, Blanca, testified she found out about the murders that morning. She went to Almeda that morning, talked to Alex to see if he and Buster were okay. And he told her, go over to Moselle and clean up the way Maggie would want you to clean up, because there's going to be a bunch of people over there. So there's no question that she must have been at that house before they all came over and took their showers. Why were police letting all this activity happen in the house before they searched it? I don't get that. Well, I don't know. I'm stymied by that. Really, I am. I have a new clock. Listen. It's very sad. It doesn't... it doesn't make that noise on top of the hour. It makes that noise at 40 minutes past the hour. I don't know why, but okay. So we know it's 40 minutes past an hour. Okay. So then they put on a mechanical engineer who's being offered as an expert in mechanical engineering, forensic engineering. In other words, but we find out that his thesis, his doctorate was done, or not his doctorate, but his master's degree was in acoustical engineering, and that he worked as a mechanical engineer for a forensic engineer company. And most of the work that he's done, we find out on cross-examination, was done in the area of accident reconstruction, like auto, truck accidents, that kind of thing. So he testified that to the angle of the bullets, the trajectory of the bullets coming out of the gun, and that whoever shot this had to be about 5'2" to 5'4" tall. and that they had done it from the hip. He says very unlikely that someone 6'4", Alec Murdoch, would have fired this weapon, the .300 Blackout. He would have had to been firing it from his kneecaps, is what this guy said. That he was holding, that he'd have to be holding the weapon very down low, like down around his kneecaps for that to happen. It would be very, very, very awkward shot for a tall person to make. So on cross-examination, the prosecution brought out that he has no formal training in ballistics or firearms. So why he was even rendering these opinions, I have no idea. So he also was an expert in acoustics. Now this I can buy. What they did was they went inside Moselle and they tried to replicate what the acoustics would be. He says, you're out in the middle of the nowhere. It's really quiet, very, very quiet. And then they fired the weapon over at the kennels, and you could not hear it at Moselle. They played the recording of the weapon being fired, and you couldn't hear anything. So it wouldn't be unusual if Alex was laying there watching. They did have a TV on because he said he had been watching TV. So they had a TV on, which he said would be like 69, 70 decibels. So the TV would have been on, and the TV was on in the recreation, the reconstruction. You could not hear this weapon. So it would not have been unusual for Alec not to have heard a gun go off, if you believe his story. So a couple of things about Buster's testimony. First of all, like I said, never ask either on a cross-examination was really short. It was not one of the main guys. It was one of the other attorney generals who's assisting with the case, and he only asked 3, 4, 5 questions, and none of them were, did you get tossed out of law school because you were cheating? No. And that goes right to the credibility of the witness, which leads me to believe that prior to this whole trial, there was some kind of motion to keep this out. But I don't know why you would keep that out. It goes to his credibility. I don't know. So it was never mentioned, never came up by either side that he had gone to law school and been thrown out for cheating. The other thing he was not asked about was the Snapchat video where you hear mom's voice, dad's voice, and his brother's. Wasn't asked about that. Nope. Not asked about it. Which I found really interesting. Yep. What else? Yeah, so he was not asked to identify his father's voice. Oh, he was shown the video of his father's interview where he breaks him down, and there was that controversy about whether he said they did him so bad or I did him so bad. He says, my dad is saying they did him so bad. He listened to it and he said, he's saying they did him so bad. And I know this because he repeated it in the days following this. They did him so bad. Okay. So there was not any sort of aha moment from Buster Murdoch, just an attempt to cover up for his dad. Like, we're talking about sloppy police work, because my God, all of this people going from Alameda back over to Moselle to take showers in the morning. Yeah, okay. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So, and day 22 has already been off to a wonderful start this morning. Already the judge has come in and been asked by Dick Griffin, stands up and asks the judge, you know, we're talking to my client about testifying, and they wanted the judge to limit the testimony on cross-examination, limit the questioning on cross-examination to the murders, nothing about the financials. And the judge says, no. I'm not going to issue any kind of order ahead of time. If you had a problem with questions that are asked on cross-examination, you just make your objection at that time, and then I'll rule. What? He wanted, because when you agree, if you're a defendant in a criminal case, you are not required under the Fifth Amendment to incriminate yourself. You do not have to testify. But if you get on that stand, you are waiving your right, your Fifth Amendment right not to testify. And you can be asked anything. And you cannot sit there and go, I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate. Because you didn't have to get up there to begin with. You could have just stayed at your defendant's table. So what his attorney was asking for is like, he just wants to waive his Fifth Amendment right as to the murders. He wants to get up and talk about those, but he wants to plead the Fifth about financial crimes and blah, 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 and all that other stuff. What? Who does he think he is? Yeah, I know. Alec Murdoch. This is also January 22nd, guys. You know what happens tonight? Netflix has released their documentary on Alec Murdoch. Guess what I'm going to be watching tonight? Because I want to see, like, I want to see it, Who doesn't want to see it? All right, let's talk about, I'm sure it's probably a series. It's in multiple parts, and I don't binge watch things, so I'll be watching it probably over the next several days. Let's talk about the mystery at Dyatlov Pass. Now, I had one subscriber go, oh, they already solved that. Well, maybe they did, but I was only on part 1. This is a 3-part story. So part 1, we heard about the fact that between the hours of February 1st and the early hours of February 2nd, something happened to this group of hikers, and no one they inexplicably never got back to where they were supposed to go, and they had sent out a search party for them. So part 2, warm coats, boots, skis, food, and other belongings were found inside the hiker's abandoned tent. Footprints led to a wooded area nearby. Under a large tree at the edge of the woods were the remnants of a fire and the bodies of Yuri. Oh my God, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this last name. Let me give it a try. Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. Okay, Yuri and Yuri. They're both named Yuri, and their last name ends with Enko. Okay, so Yuri and Yuri were found, their bodies were found near the campfire, barefoot and dressed only in their underwear. What? The branches of the tree were broken as if someone had climbed up it, perhaps looking at their camp. The bodies of Dyatlov, Zineda, and Rustem were found between the campsite and the woods. Their positions suggested they were headed back to the tent. All 5 had died of hypothermia. The remaining hikers, Ludmila, Alexander, Nikolai, and Simone, and there's last names there, but I cannot pronounce a single one of them. They were all found on May 4th in a stream buried under 13 feet of snow, about 250 feet from the tree where the others were found. Some of this group seemed to be wearing clothing torn or cut from their bodies of the others. Dubinina's tongue and eyes were missing. She and Zolotarov had died of severe chest trauma, and Theo Brignol from a major skull fracture. Kolevatov had died of hypothermia, like those in the first group that were found. What? Okay, tomorrow we're going to learn about the inquest. Yes. And if you already know the answers or, how these things end up, don't spoil it in the comments. Yeah. Because I don't read these things ahead of time. I really don't. I don't know how it's going to end up. I'll find out tomorrow when we all find out. Okay. Yes. Because I realize some of you are super intelligent. Anyway, that's the show for today, guys. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button. Give me a like. Consider subscribing. Consider becoming a member of the channel or a Patreon. And there's always that super thanks button that's down at the bottom down there. Next, you see the like button, just look over. There's a super thanks button. And more importantly, share this with someone you think might enjoy listening to live trial recaps while they're crafting. I will see you tomorrow in Crafting and Crime Daily. Tonight I will be live at 6:30 p.m. doing a craft. I might get the watercolors out. I don't know. Depends on my mood. I didn't get much sleep last night, so we'll see. I'm going to go take a nap. Anyway, love you all. See you tomorrow. Bye.